Here's a part of your fourth 9 weeks content, sequences and series. So just a quick reminder, the explicit formula for a sequence is an equals a1 times r to the n minus 1, where a1 is the first term, r is the ratio, n is the term number, and an is just that term that you get for that term number n. Okay, so a geometric sequence is found when you have a common ratio, meaning you multiply by the same thing as you move from one term to the next. Okay, so number 1, 2, and 3, you're determining if the sequences are geometric. So a geometric sequence has a common ratio, meaning you multiply by the same thing every time. So as you go from -2 to 8, what would you multiply by? That would be a -4. All right, so then you want to see, is 8 times -4 -32? Yes. And you keep going, and you see that the common ratio here is -4. You multiply by -4 every time. So number 2. Fractions, you might kind of look at that and go, oh no, fractions. But if you look from here to here, the -1 to -2, well, that would be, to go from -1 to -2, that's got to be times 2, right? So then if you wanted to come back, you could just check. You could do -1/4 times 2, see if you get -1/2, and you do. -1/2 times 2, you get -1. So here the common ratio is 2. Okay, notice these are all negatives, so your ratio is positive. Jump back to number 1. If you look, you go negative, positive, negative, positive. Remember, when you alternate signs, the ratio has to be negative. Okay, so now here, so from 4 to 44, that would be times 11. Okay, so then how do you go from 44 to 444? Well, the first thing you need to check is it times 11? 44 times 11 is 484. So no, this doesn't work. This one is not geometric, okay? Because you don't multiply by the same thing every time. All right, number 4. So 4, 5, and 6, you've been given the explicit formula. All you have to do is find the first 5 terms, okay? So if you look, it gives you the first term. So the first term here is 4, and what you're multiplying by every time is -2. Okay, so if I were to list this out, I'm going to start with 4, and I multiply by -2. So 4 times -2 is -8. You multiply by -2 every time. -8 times -2 is +16. Multiply by -2, -32. Multiply again by -2, and you get 64. Okay, so we're just pulling from the formula to figure out my first term and my ratio. So in number 5, the first term, so A1 is -36, and R is 1/2. So you're multiplying by 1/2 every time. When you multiply by 1/2, it's really like dividing by 2. So -36 times 1/2, that's -18, times 1/2, -9, times 1/2, -9/2, and times 1/2 again, -9/4. Okay, you have to be careful on number 6. So A1, your first term here is not 3. I'm going to rewrite this. Isn't it true that this is an equals 1 times 3 to the n minus 1? The exponent is always attached to the base, don't forget, and the base is your ratio. So in this case, A1 is 1, R is 3. The exponent is always attached to the ratio. So I'm starting with 1, and I multiply by 3 every time. 1 times 3 is 3, times 3 is 9, times 3 is 27, times 3 is 81. Okay? All right, so moving down. So write the explicit formula for each geometric sequence below. All right, so the important thing that you have to do first is you have to figure out the first term, and you have to figure out what you're multiplying by. Okay, so number 7, I'm starting with -3, and I need to figure out what I'm multiplying by. I know it's not going to be negative because my signs stay the same, so it's got to be positive. It's a negative ratio if it alternates signs. Okay, so 3 to 12, 12 to 48, hopefully you guys are looking at that going times 4. So 3 times 4 to the n minus 1 power. There's your explicit formula. Okay, then ask you to find the appropriate term. So this one says to find the 10th term. So what that means to do is plug in a 10 for n. So you get -3 times 4 to the 10 minus 1 power. Well, what is that? 10 minus 1. So if you plug 10 minus 1 in as the exponent, you have to make sure you put it in parentheses. What I would recommend doing is in your calculator, I would do -3 times 4 to the 9th power, because you know 10 minus 1 is 9, right? So -3 times 4 to the 9th power. That way you don't have, in case you forget the parentheses, you don't mess up. So we get -786,432. So the 10th term in that sequence is -786,432. All right, so the next one, I start with 1,458, and I'm going to multiply by something. Well, the first thing I notice is that I go positive, negative, positive. So I know it's going to be negative, okay? And my numbers are getting smaller. So when they get smaller, it's like division. So I'm maybe going to check, let's see, 1,458. I'm going to divide it by 2 and see if that works. Well, divide by 2 doesn't work. So maybe let's try 3. So I'm going to do 1,458, and I divide it by 3, and that worked. Okay, so we don't represent this in terms of division. We always use it in terms of, we represent ratios in terms of multiplication. So if you divide by 3, it's the same thing as multiplying by 1/3. Okay, so because it was alternating, I know it had to be negative. I'm dividing by 3, so I represent it with a 1/3 ratio to the n minus 1 power. So now it asks me to find the 7th term. So 1,458 times -1/3 to the 7 minus 1. And again, 7 minus 1 must go in parentheses, or you just do to the 6th power. So I'm rewriting, and I'm going to use to the 6th power. So in the calculator, you plug it in exactly like it looks. 1,458 parenthesis, -1 divided by 3, close the parenthesis, and then do caret 6, because 7 minus 1 is 6. And you should get a 2. Okay, all right, that should be a comma right there. So, all right, look at the next one. So I'm starting with 1/8, and I need to figure out what I'm doing here. Man, 1/8 to 1/4 to 1/2 to 1. Here's where I'm looking. How do you go from 1/2 to 1? 1/2 times something gives you 1, and if you don't remember how to do that, you could do 1 divided by 1/2, and you should end up getting here that the ratio is 1/2. So I'm going to have 1/8 times 1/2. Oh, I'm sorry, I did that wrong. Not 1/2, that would make it get smaller, but they're getting bigger, right? Because the numbers are getting bigger, you have to multiply by a whole number. So it's times 2. 1/2 times 2 is 1 to the n minus 1 power. So then it asks me to find the 6th term. So 1/8 times 2 to the 6 minus 1. And in the calculator, you have to put that in parentheses. At 6 minus 1, I'm just going to plug in 1/8 times 2 to the 5th. So you literally do, in the calculator, 1 divided by 8, parenthesis 2, close the parenthesis, caret 5. And you end up getting 4. Okay? All right, so that was everything with the sequences. Now down here at the bottom, we're starting to get to that letter S. So I'm going to go back up where I have some extra space. And remember, so series, that means it's a sum, okay? So series gets summed. So you have this S of n, okay? S of n, there's this other notation. It's equal to the summation, okay, starting with some term, get that correct there, from some first term to some nth term, a times r to the k minus 1 power. Notice this is really the same thing as this over here. It's just telling you to go k to whatever value. All right, and the formula for that you should remember, hopefully, summation here means sum, the s means sum, and the way that we do that is we start with some number, we multiply it times 1 minus r to the nth power over 1 minus r. A is what you start with, r is what you multiply by, n is the number of terms being summed. Okay, so if you don't remember this stuff, all three of these mean sum. Okay, S of n means sum, the summation symbol, sigma means sum, and here's the formula that you use. Okay, so going back down to the bottom, all right, so it says S10. That means sum the first 10 terms. Okay, so I'm going to start listing out what I know. So I'm starting with -2. I'm summing the first 10, okay? I need the r. What am I multiplying by? Well, it's alternating, so it's got to be negative. And from 2 to 8, 8 to 32, that's times 4. So r is -4. And then how many terms are you summing? Well, 10, right? Sum the first 10 terms. Okay, so S10 equals what you start with. We start with -2 times 1 minus r, which is -4, okay, to the 10th power over 1 minus -4. Okay? All right. So, at the bottom, the 1 minus -4 is the only one that you can make positive. You cannot make 1 minus -4 to the 10th power positive up here, because that -4 has to go to the 10th power, okay? And a negative raised to an even power is a positive. So we can't change that. Only down here on the bottom can you make this be a positive, okay? So in the calculator, you literally can plug this in just like this. -2 goes first, times the numerator, okay, 1 minus -4 to the 10th, close it, that's the numerator, divided by 1 plus 4, okay? So that can be plugged in exactly as is. -2, parenthesis, 1 minus, that -4 though, look at what I put it inside of. I put that in parentheses because you need that to go in parentheses. -4 caret 10. Make sure you put parentheses just like I did it right there. Okay, divided by 1 plus 4. You get 419,430. Okay, so number 11, it says sum, it says S13. That means sum the first 13 terms. Okay, so we're starting with -1,215. So you have to figure out what you're multiplying by. Okay, so the numbers are getting smaller, so that means that we're dividing by something. Okay, so you just need to start trying, divide by some numbers. I'm noticing there's a 15 at the end. That 15 goes to a 5. So I'm thinking maybe I should try divide by 3. And you should hopefully see that that works. So when you divide by 3, that's like multiplying by 1/3. We always write in terms of multiplication. Okay? And n is 13 here because you're summing 13 terms. Let me just draw some space here. So S13 equals -1,215 times, I'm just plugging in, 1 minus r, 1 minus 1/3 to the 13th power. It's not a bad habit to just write your ratio in parentheses every time. Divided by 1 minus 1 over 13, and that's all. Okay, So in the calculator, I'll write it out again. In the calculator, it's negative 1,215. Parenthesis, the numerator, 1 minus, parenthesis, 1 over 3, caret 13. Close it. That's the whole numerator. You want 1/3 in parentheses so that it doesn't do 1 divided by 3 to the 13th power. Okay, divided by, parenthesis, 1 minus, parenthesis, 1 over 13. Okay, literally just what's outside times the numerator divided by the denominator. So I'm going to plug that in, make sure I get the correct answer. Go ahead and plug it in your calculator. Okay, and I took too much space right there. Negative 1,822.5, and you can just round it to 1 decimal. That's fine. Okay. All right, so number 9, it says S9. That means sum the first 9 terms. First term is 4. Okay, you got to figure out what you're multiplying by. 4 to 16, hopefully you see that immediately. That's times 4, and n is 9. All right, so S9 equals what you start with, which is 4, times 1 minus r, which is 4, to the 9th power, over 1 minus 4. There's no fractions, there's no negatives. I just plug it. It's nothing too complicated. So when I plug this in the calculator, 4 times 1 minus 4 to the 9th divided by 1 minus 4. Okay, 4 times 1 minus 4 to the 9th divided by 1 minus 4. And you get 349,524. Okay. All right. So 14 and 15. So they mean the same thing as what we've done in 10, 11, and 12. The only difference is that the notation is different. So this is telling you right here, the summation, sum the first to the 7th term. Okay, so you start with the first term. So here, and I'm going to just put me a blank here for my answers to go. I'm going to leave some space so that I don't write in that area. All right, so my first term on 14, you're starting with the first term, which was 3. Your ratio is inside. R is negative. Ooh, go back. Okay, R is negative 2. And n. Okay, you're summing the first to the 7th term. So if you counted that on your fingers, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fingers, right? The first to the 7th, so n is 7. All right, so S7 equals what you start with, which was 3, times 1 minus the r, which is negative 2, put it in parentheses, to the 7th power over 1 minus negative 2. Okay? All right, so I'm going to write it out in the calculator. 3 times 1 minus negative 2 in parentheses, caret 7. Okay, that's the numerator, divided by 1. And remember, the denominator is the only one you can make plus plus. Numerator, you can't ever do that. Don't do it. 1 plus 2, close it. Okay? And then you punch that in. If you need to pause to catch up with some of this stuff, please do that. Make sure you can plug this in correctly into the calculator. Okay? And when you do that, you should get 129 for your answer here. All right, 15. So 15 is the same thing. Sum the first to the 8th term, okay? So A1, what you're starting with is negative 256. Your R is 1/2. Your N, when you start at 1 and go to 8, it's just 8. It gets tricky when you start at a different one, okay? So S8 equals. If you haven't tried this one on your own, I would encourage you to go ahead and just try this. Pause the video. Go ahead and try this to see if you can do it by yourself. I'm just going to continue to write. Okay. All right. So that's how you would set it up. Negative 256 times 1 minus 1/2 to the 8th power over 1 minus 1/2. Be careful with parentheses. So coming next is what I type into my calculator, just like I am writing it. I'm getting into number 16 here. I don't want to do that. Okay. So then when you plug that in, right, I got negative 510. Okay. All right, so 16. So 16 is where we're getting crazy. All right. So 16 says, I want the box. There we go. Sum the second to the 8th term. So I'm not starting with the 5th term. Okay. I'm starting with the 2nd term. And notice there's something missing there, right? There's an understood 1 in front of that 5. That's really 1 times 5 to the k minus 1. All right, so the first term was 1, but you need to find the 2nd term, right? So this one's kind of easy to do. You could just list this out. The first term was 1. Then you're multiplying by 5. 1 times 5 is 5, right? And if you wanted to keep going, 5 times 5 is 25. Times 5 is 125. That's your sequence, right? So here's your 2nd term. That's what you're starting with, right? So A2 is 5. Your R is 5. And your N, okay, we got to think. I'm summing the 2nd to the 8th term, okay? It's not 6. So count it. Ready? Start counting on your finger. The 2nd term, the 3rd term, the 4th term, the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, the 8th. Your N is actually going to be 7 total terms. All right, so we plug in S7 equals what I start with. It's not the first term of 1. It's actually the 2nd term of 5. Times 1 minus R, which is 5 to the 7th power, because N was 7, over 1 minus 5. So in the calculator, 5 times 1 minus 5, caret 7, divided by 1 minus 5. And you get 97,655 for that final answer. So just be careful that you pay attention to the term that you're starting to sum with. So the number that goes outside of the parentheses of the sum formula is the value you start with. It's not always the first term. You just have to pay attention to what it's saying. All right, so 17 is the last one, and it says find the sum of the 5th to the 11th term. There you go, right there. So that is the summation, k equals 5 to 11. Start with the 5th term, go to the 11th. Okay, so I'm just going to write this out. I'm starting with 2 over 81. 2 over 81 is the first term, and I'm multiplying by something to the k, not n. Multiply by something to the k minus 1 power, if I were to set it up like my summations look up at the top. So I've got to figure out What am I doing here? Okay. Notice the numerators are staying the same. When you have a fraction like that, if the numerators are staying the same and the denominators are changing, you're definitely multiplying by something. Okay. And they're getting bigger. So even though it looks like they're not, 2 over 81 to 2 over 27, you're getting bigger. Even though the denominators are getting smaller, the actual fraction itself is getting larger. It's getting closer to 1. Okay, so that means you're multiplying by a whole number. So look at the relationship between 81, 27, 9, and 3. Hopefully you guys see that relationship there is a 3. So what you want to try in your calculator is do 2 over 81 times 3 and see if it gives you 2 over 27. You may have to do fraction to decimal to get there. So if you did 2 divided by 81 times 3, you end up getting a decimal. But notice that's not a decimal in my sequence, so I'm going to do second PRB, and that changes fractions to decimals on your scientific calculator. Press enter, and I got 2 over 27. So I found that I'm multiplying by 3. Okay. So the other thing is I need to figure out when I do this sum, okay, so I'm starting with the 5th term. Well, hey, look over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? I've got the 4 have been given to me. What would the 5th term be? Could you do 2 over 3 times 3? So you get 2, right? So the next number in the sequence, which is also, notice, remember this goes with the other one. That's your 5th term right there, right? So my 5th term is 2. So I'm starting with 2. My R was 3, and I need to figure out N. So how many terms am I adding together? So 5th to 11, it's not 6 total, right? Count them out. It's the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, the 9th, the 10th, the 11th, which gives you a 7. Okay, so we're summing 7 terms. So S7 is what we're doing, okay? So the sum of 7 terms starting with the 5th term, 2. So 2 over 81 was the first term. I start with the 5th term, which was the 2, times 1 minus 3 to the 7th over 1 minus 3. So the way it plugs in, 2 times 1 minus 3, caret 7, divided by 1 minus 3. And you should get 2,186. Okay? All right, so I'm going to zoom out of this if I can figure this out. So you can pause right here if you need to, and this will let you have access to all of these answers on this part of the review, so you can check out what you need. I hope this helps.